Stuck between a libertarian and a Republican. Welcome to Publitarian Podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Ronald Johnson, Publitarian, coming at you again with another episode of Publitarian Podcast. And we're up to episode number 46, and I'm going to be calling this episode The Bigger Problem. But before I get to the main meat of what I wanted to talk about on today's podcast, I wanted to just give a heartfelt condolence to the people of Sri Lanka that have lost their lives due to radical Islam, or as the former president and other liberals would call them, Easter worshippers. Those poor Easter worshippers. There's no way we'd be able to call them Christians because that would just be politically incorrect. And the longer we ignore this problem, the bigger it's going to get. And what I always hear is, oh, no, this isn't Islam. This isn't representative of Islam. This is just a small percentage. Well, if you run those numbers and look how many billions of Muslims there are in the world, and you're like, it's only, this many percent, that's still a lot of radicalized individuals. And, I wasn't even planning on talking about Islam. That's not even where I was wanting to go today. But I'm thinking about how everybody puts their heads in the sand when there's an Islamic terror attack. But if a white person carries out some kind of crime, it makes global news and people beat the drum for weeks. And then we on the right always have to go out and make apologies and jump ahead and go, well, that's not us. That's not representative of who we are. Blah, 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 blah. And what I'm saying is I never see that from the other side of the aisle. So everybody that says, oh, but that's not really Islam, there's Muslims that aren't like that. Yes, okay, I'm sure that is the case. Matter of fact, I know that's the case. I actually used to work for a Muslim, believe it or not. And while I would say that, yes, there is moderate Islam, the moderates don't stand up. That's why they're moderate. They won't stand up. They won't make any kind of noise. There will be no opposition to the radical side of Islam. So if you're a moderate Muslim and you're not standing up to this, you're just as culpable, because when those people that are in the minority become the majority, and they will, just look around the world at just about any Muslim overpopulated area, the same result will happen. And you'll have a Sharia-compliant dictatorship. So once I start seeing Muslim people calling out these atrocities and these brutal acts of terrorism for what they are, then I will change my stance on that. Anyway, I did not mean to get into that diatribe. Speaking of radical Islam, I want to give a shout out to my girl Laura Loomer, who's an investigative journalist, one of the few conservative journalists that's not afraid to stand up to the problem that I just mentioned. I may have her on the podcast one day. She gets deplatformed a lot. She gets taken off of social media, and she's one of the few on our side of the aisle, like I said, that's actually just no holds barred and gets out there, gets in people's faces, holds people accountable. Matter of fact, I've heard fellow podcasters throw shade at her and take shots at her, which I think is bullcrap. I mean, until you're doing what she's doing, I don't think you deserve to take any kind of shot at her for what she does. So anyway, since being deplatformed by Twitter, she is launching a lawsuit against Twitter and CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations. CARE funds Hamas. As far as I'm concerned, they're just the funding for terror groups. So she's going up against these two entities. And if you go to freeloomer.com, freeloomer.com, you can donate to her cause. And funny enough, I went to her website to check it out. She's got 666 donors. That's not good. Let's give her at least one more donor so we can not have that number on there. But I think she's looking to pick up, at like $300,000 to fight this. Lawsuits are expensive, and she does need the money. And since she's not, I think Instagram is the only social media platform that she's left on. And I'm sad about it because I see a lot of, with the exception of maybe Michelle Malkin, there's not really a lot of like high-ranking conservatives that will have her on their shows. And it's because I think we, again, as right-wingers, conservatives, try to be the people that are reasonable, and we don't want to fall into this trap of being like edgy or in your face, and we just want to be quiet and polite and calmly and rationally do our facts and data. And we are past calm and rational. Like I've said before in previous podcasts, and I'll continue to say it, we are 40 years too late to a culture war. We're late. And facts and data and logic are nice. Yes, we need to have those in our little quiver, our arsenal, but we need warriors. We need people with the battle axes that'll go out there on the front lines and get stuff done. And Laura Loomer is one of those people that are doing that. So I would challenge you to go to her website. That's freeloomer.com. Donate to her cause, donate to her journalism, and help her make a difference. And of course, what kind of podcaster would I be if I did not weigh in on the whole Mueller Report fiasco? Oh, by the way, Beer Fridge is happy, and I am enjoying a Kona Brewing Company Big Wave Golden Ale. Not too bad. Not the best beer I've ever had, but certainly not the worst. So, the Mueller Report recap. No collusion and no obstruction of justice. The irony of this entire Mueller report, as I'm sure you already know, is that everyone colluded with Russia, except for Donald Trump and his campaign. It's so laughable. What does the Godfather Limbaugh say? Whatever the Democrats are accusing you of, know that they are the ones doing it, and it just rings true. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the whole Spygate debacle on this podcast, but anybody that listens to this podcast, I'm sure, has read into it already. Obviously, this was opposition research paid for by Hillary Clinton and the manner of the Steele dossier. So the irony is Hillary Clinton colluded with Russia. Oh my God. All these bad actors that are investigating colluded with Russia somehow, and Donald Trump was the one that got investigated. Anyway, that's collusion, Hillary, but we'll be waiting for that. Hopefully there will be some kind of investigation. I know, I hate the two-tier justice system. I could also throw that into this podcast as being part of, quote, the bigger problem. The two-tier justice system in this country is so ridiculous. You've got a group of people that just owe so many favors to the world, and they know where all the bodies are buried, that apparently the rules don't apply to them. So I am hoping that the president is playing some kind of 4D chess, and the bear trap is slowly closing on all of these people because they need to go down. We're not going to have justice or any kind of law and order in this country unless these bad actors get taken down and prosecuted. But anyway, the Mueller report came out. He left just enough breadcrumbs so everybody could throw their own conjecture and spin in there, and I called it. I knew that's exactly what it was going to be. He was going to release the report, say no collusion, no obstruction, because he had to. He can't manufacture evidence. And then I knew he was just going to throw enough BS talking points in there that will give the left, the media, the willing accomplices, and also any Democrat politician fodder to run with. And that's exactly what he did. I called it. I nailed it. But I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus or anything. It's just I knew that's exactly what was going to happen. So the president tweeted that it was time to turn the tables and to investigate all of these bad actors, and I hope and pray that it's not just talk and there's actually going to be some action happening with that. And as usual, the conservatives and freethinkers and people on the right side of the aisle are caught up in this game of thinking that we need to clear Donald Trump of all wrongdoing as well, or that we need to answer every charge. This country's justice system is innocent until proven guilty. Not guilty until proven innocent, or as Jesse Waters said, not guilty. It is up to the prosecution to prove guilt, and they did not. So we need to move on. If we don't, we're going to be stuck in the same quagmire forever. Nothing is ever going to be satisfying to the left because they're not looking for justice. They're looking for the president to be gone. So we can't keep falling into this trap that, we need to carry Donald Trump's water or we need to help exonerate him. No. The end of the discussion is no collusion, no obstruction of justice. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And that's what needs to happen. If we keep falling into this trap and keep playing defense, we're never going to mount an offense. And that's what's happening right now. And I'm just sick to death of it. Now, what I actually wanted to have the podcast about was the bigger problem. And what I see as the bigger problem that is not being addressed, two things actually. One, right now, is all of the unelected bureaucrats that run this country. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Ronald, there's no unelected bureaucrats running this country. It's we the people. And we are a representative republic. And we elect these representatives to represent us. And that's how it works. What are you talking about? Well, sit back, my friend, and let me just take you down the rabbit hole of bureaucracy. Surprisingly enough, a piece from USA Today, and this is back from 2017, unelected bureaucrats are running our lives. You didn't give these clowns power, they just grabbed it. Watching the ongoing, this is from USA Today, which I find is funny. Of course, they're going to kind of spin it sort of liberally, but anyway, bear with me on this. Watching the ongoing clown show in Washington, Americans can be forgiven for asking themselves, why did we give this bunch of clowns so very much power over our nation and our lives? Well, don't feel so bad, voters, because you didn't actually give them that much power. They just took it. That's the thesis of Columbia law professor Philip Hamburger's new book, The Administrative Threat. And I'm not going to go through the whole article here, obviously, because like I said, I don't like to read articles online because it gets boring. But let us pause here. One, Philip Hamburger, awesome name. I'm getting hungry right now just thinking about it. So I started looking into Philip Hamburger, and funny enough, there's a lot of liberal sites that are using his talking points, talking about unelected bureaucrats, which I find hilarious because unelected bureaucrats are like one of the tenets of liberalism. Pack the power system with them. So I dug a little bit deeper on Columbia law professor Philip Hamburger, and guess what I found? I found out that he did a PragerU video on this very subject. And normally I wouldn't play clips this long, but it addresses everything that I wanted to say in this 5-minute clip. So bear with me for this 5-minute clip. This is actually Philip Hamburger, the guy that wrote the book, The Administrative Threat, and this is what he has to say about it.
If someone suggested to you that Americans should reject representative government and return to the rule of kings, you would laugh. This is America, you would say. In our revolution, we got rid of monarchy. And of course you'd be right, but only to a point. Monarchy is making a comeback, though not in the way you think. Let me explain. A king is one person. Get rid of him, and you might get your freedom back. But what do you do when the nation has come to be controlled by thousands of little kings, almost supreme in their specialized fiefdoms, who have vast power over your life, much as a king might? Good question, because that's what we're up against. This regime is called the administrative state. Its little kings are unelected bureaucrats, officially known as administrators, secretaries, or even czars. And make no mistake, they are very powerful. Their decisions affect us every day. The FDA, the FCC, the SEC, and so on and so on. Put together almost any 3 or 4 random letters, and chances are you've stumbled on a government agency. These agencies and the people in them shape our lives, often for the worse. Many farmers in California lost their livelihoods because the Fish and Wildlife Service decided that the Delta smelt, a tiny fish, was more important than the farmer's water supply. That decision may have been right or it may have been wrong. My point is simply that the decision should have been made by our lawmakers who are accountable to us at the next election. Those farmers are among the millions of hardworking people directly hurt by the administrative state. And many more millions have been indirectly hurt, such as all those discouraged from even starting a business by miles of bureaucratic red tape. This is not an argument against government regulation per se, but against regulation imposed by bureaucrats rather than by our elected lawmakers, whom we can hold accountable at the next election. Here's the larger danger. As bureaucracy grows, individual freedom diminishes. How do we get into this mess? And more importantly, how do we get out of it? America's founders recognized the problem. They didn't like being told what to do by people they hadn't voted for. They built all kinds of protections into the US Constitution, starting with its very first line after the preamble. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. All legislative powers, not some. This means only Congress can make the nation's laws. Congress thus cannot divest itself of that power to a bureaucracy. And that's how America operated for most of its first 100 years. This changed when many Americans, such as Woodrow Wilson, fell in love with centralized bureaucratic power. Wilson was a university professor before he moved into politics and eventually became president in 1912. A self-described progressive reformer, he was impatient for power. He wasn't interested in persuading the American people to come over to his point of view. That would take too long. So instead, he aimed to shift lawmaking power out of Congress and into the hands of a professional class of government workers, in other words, bureaucrats. Franklin Roosevelt, who served in Wilson's cabinet, perfected his mentor's vision when he became president. For him, as for Wilson, there were few problems administrative power couldn't solve. FDR's presidency produced an alphabet soup of new government programs that vastly expanded the administrative state. And since then, it has grown even more dramatically. Congress still passes laws, but it leaves it to the bureaucracy to fill in the gaps. And these gaps can be enormous. Consider, for example, the Affordable Care Act of 2009, what came to be known as Obamacare. The bill itself was over 2,500 pages, but Congress left much unspecified. So career government officials, elected by no one, went to work. And by 2013, there were an additional 10,000 pages of regulations. So how do we rein in these faceless monarchs? First, Congress should actually do its job and take responsibility for the laws it passes. Don't hold your breath. But they at least could do this. Congress should end legal immunity for bureaucrats who abuse their power. If they know they can be sued, they'll be a lot more sober about imposing rules others have to live by. Second, the courts should do their job. They must follow the law. That means protecting our constitutional freedoms, including our right to representative government. No more bureaucratic rulemaking. And finally, we have to do our job. We must assert our freedom in conversation, on the web, and in the courts. We don't want to be ruled by a king or thousands of little kings. As the founders would have said, no regulation without representation. I'm Philip Hamburger, professor of law at Columbia Law School and president of the New Civil Liberties Alliance for Prager University.
Thank you, Philip Hamburger, for that. Like I said, that's a little bit of a longer clip than I would normally play on the show, but I think it was apropos because he can explain it even better than I can. He wrote an entire book on it. It's called The Administrative Threat, and that's what's happening now. And if you look at this, this is one of the bigger problems. All of these little kings, czars, whatever, unelected, unaccountable, all of these alphabet letter agencies slowly eroding away our freedoms. This needs to change, and it needs to change quick, because administration equals bureaucracy equals shit show. And if you need local examples, I can give you local examples as well. Just think about, I don't know, it seems like only really senior citizens go to city council meetings, but even if you go to local politics, it's always kind of like a good old boy network, they call it. Like if you know somebody, you get something done. If you don't know somebody, nothing will get done. That goes back to the old adage of you can't fight City Hall. Well, at least those people are somewhat accountable. But even the ones that are accountable, that you can vote out, once they get in this position of admin, they see themselves as a ruler or above you. And that also needs to change. So you've got the unelected bureaucracies and all of these three-letter agencies and all these czars and little positions of power all over this country. And then in the local level, you have the people that are sort of accountable to the voting populace, but not really. Anybody that votes isn't super paying attention. Just another quick clip, the infamous Seattle City Council meeting where this guy's trying to get something done from the Seattle City Council, and these people are just rulers. They're just, I wish there was a video show so I could play it for you. These people are just looking down at their phones, really not interested in what this gentleman has to say. And it's really scary. I don't want to play that clip for you. This is a quicker one. I cut the clip a little short because it's just a lot of podium noise, and the guy is walking up and he's getting ready to give his address, and he's got the papers in his hand. So I'm starting the clip right when he gets into the microphone and starts talking.
Before you start the clock, could you stop it for a second? It's real discouraging to come up here and see all the heads down. It's like, you know.
Sir, you're on a 2-minute timer here, so let's go.
Oh man, that, that gets me going. Anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
I'm not following you.
You're on a 2-minute timer.
Could you start it over, please?
No, we're not going to. Just go ahead.
So it was unreasonable for you to ask that people look up and give me their attention?
Sir, you have 2 minutes. We're all looking at you. You have 2 minutes. Now you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I guess I won't be able to say it. Last week, you limited, this kind of goes to the heart of what I was going to talk about, which was the state of our democracy. Last week, you limited speakers because of the number of speakers to 1 minute each, but you allowed Camilla Jayapal to speak as long as she wanted to. It was 4 or 5 minutes. And it reminded me of George Orwell's famous saying from Animal Farm about how all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel like I'm being treated now, just because I was kind of asking for your attention. Like, I noticed you all were very attentive to Ms. Jayapal last week. And I just wanted to ask for your attention before I started. And I immediately got a hostile response back from you. I don't understand that. So you don't ever respond to citizens, or what's?
I do, sir, but you have 2 minutes for public comment to the agenda items.
Well, it's all on tape, and I think it's a pretty sad commentary that you think that asking for you guys to look up off of your computers and give attention during this short period of time was an unreasonable thing. I really feel bad about that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Oh, bureaucracy in action. Oh, man. And there you have it, folks. Bureaucracy and admin in action, which is the part B of the bigger problem. These representatives that see themselves as rulers and not representatives that are supposed to represent the people, work for the people. And then on the federal scale, look no further than Congress, obviously. And you have all of these people that are just in the country club up there that forget that the majority of them forget that they work for the people. So why I wanted to bring attention to this, and this was a very clip-heavy show. I don't normally do a lot of clips like that, but why I wanted to bring attention to it is because a lot of us, and rightly so, are putting our faith in President Trump because he is doing a good job, and he is one of the few that's pushing back against all of this liberal bureaucratic nightmare. But he's just one dude, and he's going to have another term, I'm sure. But then after that, now what? Like I said, we're 40 years late to the culture war. And we finally got a warrior that's fighting. Once that warrior is gone, like, who's coming next? Make no mistake that liberals already have an answer to whatever we've got. They're already coming around our backside with daggers, getting ready to stab us, even though we keep pushing forward. And that's what we don't do. We're never proactive about these things. So what can we do about this? Well, one of the things you can do is start getting involved in local politics. Politics is local. And a lot of us keep our eyes off the prize and we're looking at what's happening federal. We're all about what's happening with the federal government because, I mean, that is a large swath of our government. But make no mistake, this bureaucracy, this level of what I would call entitled admin happens at local levels as well. And we need to start pushing back on those fronts as well. And that is part one, because if I get into part two of the bigger problem, this is going to be an hour-long podcast, and I'm already over my time that I normally like to do for the podcast, so I'm going to end it there. So, if you have any questions or commentary, of course, as always, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I am Publitarian on Instagram, or I am Publitarian@gmail.com, or thepublitarian@gmail.com. I'm on all the social medias as Publitarian. So I will make this a two-parter now that I'm seeing the clock. So I will get to part two of the bigger problem on the next episode. And this has been Ronald Johnson, Publitarian, and thank you so much for listening to my podcast.
You've been listening to Publitarian Podcast. Copyright 2019.